Deloitte Tax, welcome to the Tax News and Views podcast. In this series, we talk to specialists from Deloitte about the latest business issues and developments. I'm Carrie Falkenhayn, your host for Tax News and Views. And joining me today for a special tax policy edition of the podcast is Jonathan Traub from Deloitte's Tax Policy Group. Listeners to this series are familiar with our discussions about the potential for significant tax legislation under the Biden presidency. At times, that possibility looked hopeful, only to be struck down by Senator Manchin. We're recording this podcast on July 28th because we have a significant development. And that was that last night, Senator Schumer and Manchin announced a major agreement on a bigger tax and spending package than we thought we were going to see from the Senate later on this month. So, John, let me start out. Was that a surprise, or how much of a surprise was that?
The answer is very much a surprise. I've been in and around Washington for more than 3 decades. And there are events that you say, well, that wasn't really likely, but there certainly could have happened. As an example of that I would give is in 2016, most people thought Hillary Clinton would beat Donald Trump. But nobody said, I will bet my life that won't happen. Like it was sort of within the realm of possibility, he would beat her, even though people thought that wasn't going to happen. This is in a whole other category. I said to some people last night, that if you ask me which is more likely, this deal coming together or Jimmy Carter running a sub 4-minute marathon with a 747 strapped to his back, I might have bet on the former president. This was incredibly unexpected.
And there's a lot of tax developments in what has been proposed. So maybe you can take us through that.
Yeah, there are 4 major tax things to talk about. One is the agreement includes the book minimum tax proposal that was in the House passed bill from November of last year. It is slightly modified to account for a number of technical changes as well as to better align the treatment of defined benefit plan expenses and income. But that's in there. Second, there's a change in the tax treatment of carried interest. The most easy to understand change is that the holding period to qualify for capital gains treatment of carried interests is extended from 3 years to 5. But there are other more complex changes to go through that deal with how you define when the holding period has begun and et cetera. There will be a big impact for folks in especially the private equity space. Third, there's a very large package of funding for various forms of clean energy, alternative energy, electric vehicles to try to promote the decarbonization of the American economy. And fourthly, there's about $80 billion of funding to the IRS, which is expected to help them with compliance and enforcement and generate a positive ROI in terms of more tax revenue collected than the $80 billion being spent.
So I didn't hear you say anything about delaying the 174 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provisions.
No, that's been so far the bridesmaid multiple times this year. It keeps getting left behind at the altar. Congress might deal with in a lame duck session. However, the prospects for a lame duck session, that's getting a little beyond what I really think we know at this point, but the prospects for a lame duck session are probably not as good today as they were yesterday. Republicans, and there's a long backstory here, Carrie, but I'll try and make it quick. Republicans and Democrats passed in the Senate yesterday something known as the CHIPS bill, which is a bill to promote the manufacturing of computer chips in the U.S. Republicans were objecting to the CHIPS bill, saying we weren't going to vote for this unless the reconciliation bill was first put to bed in a negative way. It didn't get done. When Democrats scaled it back to be a health-only bill, Republicans said, okay, that's good enough. We'll let the CHIPS bill pass. And it passed the Senate yesterday with, I think, 64 votes. And they needed a bunch of Republican votes because this was not a reconciliation-protected bill. Well, within hours of CHIPS passing the Senate, Manchin and Schumer unveiled this big agreement, which clearly had been in the works for multiple days. And Republicans feel pretty burned by what they see as a little bit of bait and switch that was played on them. And that may create some hard feelings. But we'll see when the House votes later today on its version of the CHIPS Act. Remember, the bill has to pass both chambers to go to the president. You may see an erosion of Republican support for CHIPS in the House as a result. And it's too early to say, but there could be knock-on effects as we get towards a lame duck in terms of the willingness to have bipartisan cooperation. And that could implicate the outlook for something like a 174.
Got it. So what's going to happen next? And say the name of this piece of legislation just for our audience so that if they want to Google it.
Oh, right. So it's called the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, a nod to Senator Manchin's ongoing and serious concerns about the need to tackle inflation, which, as you know, Carrie, is at historic high levels. Then you ask, Carrie, what happens next? And Last night, Senator Schumer sent a copy of the bill to the Senate parliamentarian. The parliamentarian and her staff will review it to see if it's compliant with something known as the Byrd Rule. The Byrd Rule, named for former West Virginia Senator Robert Byrd, limits what you can and cannot do in budget reconciliation. There are a variety of tests that the Byrd Rule encompasses, including that every provision in the bill must have a direct impact on the deficit, and that impact can't be, quote, merely incidental. So she'll review the bill and may suggest changes need to be made to be in compliance with the Byrd Rule. Assuming it comes back clean, that they make changes to get the parliamentarian comfortable, the next step would be for the Senate to consider the bill as early as next week.
So it seems like the challenge to get anything passed has been Senator Manchin. So is it fair to assume that this is going to pass now?
Well, let's go back a step and say that it was never just Senator Manchin. He for sure got all the headlines as the biggest stumbling block. But there were a number of other places where Democrats were having trouble getting to unanimity among their members. Remember, Senator Sinema took the idea of corporate rate increases off the table. We know there's members in the House who really want changes to the SALT deduction. There are members in the House who really want immigration reform changes. There's a variety of other concerns members have raised about raising taxes, especially as we saw this morning when the first imprint of Q2 GDP came in negative, meaning we've had 2 straight negative quarters. Now, I know that the economists will argue whether that constitutes a recession or not, but a common definition many people use as a thumbnail is 2 quarters of negative GDP equates to a recession. And again, I know that it's not the official rule that the NBER will use, but it's something that politicians will sort of worry about. So Senator Sinema was not consulted in this deal. She, among other things, has been concerned about changes to carried interest. Interesting to see whether she now is okay with doing this. You would think at this point in the process, Senator Schumer has a very good feel for where the other 49 members of his Democratic caucus are, but this process has been such an up and down roller coaster that I don't think anything is a given here. And I would note that passage in the House is no slam dunk. I talked about the members who are demanding changes to the state and local tax deduction. Speaker Pelosi currently has a 4-seat majority in the House. That's likely to shrink to 3 next week. There's a special election in Minnesota to fill the vacant seat of deceased Congressman Jim Hagedorn. That seat is likely to be captured by Republicans. If so, her margin of error goes down to 3, which makes the already difficult task she faces passing it even more difficult. So I don't think, given what we've seen in the last 16, 18 months, ever since Democrats captured a razor-thin majority in the Senate, nothing has been easy. And this, despite the enormous headlines and interest it's generating, this will not be an easy layup either.
So, John, do they need to have all their members present in order for this to pass?
Very much so, Carrie. It's a great question. In fact, the Senate has had some absentee issues of late. In the last couple of weeks, at least 3 senators had COVID, including Joe Manchin. This morning, Senate Democratic whip, the sort of second ranker in the Senate, Dick Durbin, tested positive for COVID. Pat Leahy, the president pro tempore of the Senate, has been missing for a couple of weeks as he's recovering from multiple hip surgeries. And so in a 50-50 Senate, your majority is only as strong as your ability to make sure all your members show up. So attendance is a critical issue. I would not be surprised if Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer tells his members, do not get tested. From this point forward, you may not take a COVID test, because if members test positive and can't vote, he won't have 50 votes to pass the bill.
Well, I guess that ensures that you and I will be speaking again soon, and I look forward to that. So thank you for that update. If people would like more information, you can subscribe to the email version of Tax News and Views on Deloitte.com. You can also connect with John directly via LinkedIn. And of course, we hope you tune in here for future policy editions. In the meantime, thank you for listening in. Hope you all continue to be well.